name is Kelly Pierce, and I am here in the Draper office. I'm a therapist, and it's been awesome working for Blomquist Hale. I love that this is an option for employees and their dependents. It's just says, it speaks volumes about where you all work, that they're willing to invest in this for you. I am super excited to share about this topic that's deeply meaningful to me. So my journey with this topic began when I was working in an outpatient substance abuse and mental health recovery program. I saw firsthand how powerful it can be. And so much of today's content comes from Brené Brown's 12-week group therapy curriculum, centered on understanding and developing skills to manage shame in healthy ways. Personally, I found this material transformative because I have tried to apply the awareness of the skills in my own life, and I've witnessed the positive impact it's had on clients that I've worked with too. So I hope these insights resonate in some way with you guys and provide value. If you have any questions, again, type them in the chat and we can address them most likely at the end of the presentation. And I just want to thank you all for being here. Okay, so I think I'm going to minimize that. Okay. So who is Brené Brown? This is her model that we're going to be talking about. A lot of people are familiar with her, but for those who aren't, she is a research professor and a best-selling author. She is known for her work on vulnerability, courage, shame, and empathy. She developed the shame resilience theory based on years, or actually decades of research. So she explains why she started studying this topic, and she just saw shame as a very a deeply misunderstood and pervasive emotion that affects how we live, how we connect with ourselves, with others, or how we what gets in the way of that connection, and just the ways that we interact with others. So while she was researching vulnerability and connection, she discovered that shame was a common barrier that prevented people from forming meaningful relationships and living authentically. So she focused her research on understanding shame, its effects, and how people can manage it in ways that really allow them to maintain a sense of worthiness and connection to others. So what is shame? So based on her extensive research from interviewing hundreds of people on the topic, she developed this definition. Shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and connection. So shame makes a person believe that something they've experienced, something they've done, or something they haven't done makes them unworthy of belonging with others. Shame is the voice in our head that says, I'll never be good enough. And it's fueled by the fear of being exposed for what we feel or believe is unacceptable about us. So let's talk about shame. First of all, we all experience it. It is a universal primitive emotion that everyone experiences regardless of culture, age, or society. It's deeply rooted in our evolutionary need for social acceptance and belonging. So shame arises when we perceive that our sense of connection or worthiness is at risk, making us feel vulnerable and disconnected from others. Shame isn't easy to talk about. In fact, Brené Brown says even mentioning the word when in her research and talking to people, even saying the word shame, let's talk about shame, what could evoke like a strong sense of fear in people. Unfortunately, we can't avoid or become resistant to shame. So it's important to learn how to manage it and respond to it skillfully. And this is the objective of the shame resilience theory and model that Dr. Brown developed. Okay, so what is resilience? Like, what are we working toward here? So the definition of shame resilience is, it means that we developing the ability to recognize, understand, and then work through shame in ways that help us maintain our self-worth instead of letting shame define or control us. So that's our goal. And in doing this work, it's really important. I had a client the other day say, well, isn't a little bit of shame good for us? And what I think she was actually asking was more about guilt, right? So it's important really to distinguish the difference between guilt and shame, because they're often used interchangeably, but in fact, they're very different. So you can see guilt on, excuse me. Oh, sorry. Okay, I'll keep going. So guilt is on the left side. Guilt is the feeling that comes up when we believe that we've done something wrong or made a mistake. Guilt says I did something bad. But with guilt, it's focused on the behavior, not the self. It's about recognizing that our actions were wrong, and it can motivate us to make amends or change our behavior. Research shows that guilt is healthy and adaptive because it can help us enhance our moral behavior, it increases empathy, and it helps us grow personally. Shame, on the other hand, is a much more internal and internally focused on who we are as a person. So it says, I'm bad. Shame attacks the core of our identity, and it makes us feel fundamentally flawed or unworthy. Instead of being constructive, it leads to negative self-perceptions and thinking that one is incapable of change or even unworthy of improvement. So for these reasons, for these obvious reasons, shame, it's unhealthy and damaging, and it's strongly linked to mental health struggles such as anxiety, depression, and self-esteem. Okay, so now that we've distinguished that difference, let's talk about how shame develops. So no one is born with shame. Shame develops through a combination of personal experiences, social influences, and cultural expectations. It often begins early in life, and it's really shaped by how we interpret and internalize our interactions with others. So we're going to talk, this list includes some of the main factors that contribute to how we develop shame. So early childhood experiences, all roads lead back to childhood, right? But shame often originates in childhood, where our sense of self is really being developed and shaped by the reactions we get from reactions from caregivers, from family members, and from other authority figures. So children who are frequently criticized, punished, or shamed for their behavior might internalize the belief that something's wrong with them. Otherwise, why would this be happening? Why would I be getting in so much trouble? Why would I be punished? It must be something to do with me. Another factor is if a child's needs are dismissed or ignored, they might develop shame around just simply expressing emotion or having needs. I actually had a client years ago who was diagnosed with ADHD as a child, and he, just from the onset of his life, was being told, stop doing that. You need to shape up. Why do you keep making that mistake? He was getting in trouble in school because of impulsivity. And so just constant barrage of these messages of like, why can't you do it? Why can't you do it right? And so he developed a deep sense of shame just starting early in childhood. Socialization and cultural norms. So as we start to grow up, these expectations are imposed on us by family, school, society, and they begin to play a large role in the development of shame. Some examples of that are like boys are often taught to suppress vulnerability and emotion, and they might feel shame for just simply having emotions. And girls, on the other hand, are frequently socialized to prioritize appearance or relationships. And this can lead to shame if they feel they don't measure up. Trauma and negative life events. People who experience physical, emotional, or sexual abuse or being bullied this can deeply ingrain a sense of shame in them, because oftentimes what happens is they internalize the experience, believing that somehow they're to blame or that they're defective because of what's happened to them. Negative life events like setbacks like academic failure, losing a job, rejection in relationships can lead to feelings of shame as well. Interpersonal relationships, these have a significant impact. Just our day in and day out interactions. If we're in a relationship with a partner who constantly criticizes or our appearance or our abilities, that can have a profound impact. Maybe a teenager who doesn't feel like they fit into a popular social group may feel ashamed about their identity or appearance. Cultural and societal oppression. So marginalized groups often experience shame due to discrimination or systemic oppression. An example of this would be, a person on the LGBTQ spectrum and growing up in an environment where that's not, that's discouraged or even looked down on. They might feel ashamed of their sexual orientation, even though it's an inherent part of who they are. Media, gosh, this is a biggie. Brené Brown really drives home how impactful media can be, right? We're just constantly surrounded with media images of, idealized lifestyles, appearances, and successes. And so that can leave us feeling like, wow, what's wrong with me? My life's not like that at all. I'm struggling in all sorts of ways and their lives are perfect. There must be something wrong with me. So over time, shame can really become internalized, leading to negative self-talk and self-criticism. So when it becomes internalized, instead of recognizing that shame is a temporary emotional state, people begin to believe that their trauma, their shortcomings, or mistakes define their worth. Okay, so as you can see, there's so many ways that shame can develop. And what affects one person deeply may have little to no impact on another. So just because a person has experienced one of these things doesn't mean that they'll automatically develop shame. But for those who are affected, if the shame is left unaddressed, it can become persistent and a deep-rooted feeling that influences how they show up in the world. Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit and talk about how shame affects our automatic reactions and behavior. So what happens inside the brain when shame shows up? So Dr. Brown draws on neuroscience to highlight that shame and trauma share common pathways in the brain. So when someone experiences shame, their brain can react in a way that's similar to when you're experiencing a physical threat. So the amygdala, or our brain's threat detector, gets activated, leading to heightened stress, and then the body can go into survival mode. So we've got our fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Some people don't know what fawn is. Fight's pretty obvious. Flight, we run away, we avoid. Freeze will shut down, dissociate, or become immobilized. But fawn is where we kind of appease or over accommodate. So when we're in this state, our higher cognitive functioning, this part of our brain becomes impaired. And under the influence of shame, our prefrontal cortex can go offline. And this part of our brain is really important for rational thought, problem solving, and decision making. So when shame shows up, it makes it really hard to think clearly or logically in the moment. Shame can also trigger a flood of stress hormones like cortisol, which can intensify the feelings of fear and helplessness. Because of this, shame can feel so overwhelming and difficult to process emotionally. So Dr. Brown uses these insights to underscore how powerful shame can be as an emotion. and why it can feel paralyzing. And she refers to it as a full contact emotion that affects body, mind, and spirit. All right, so let's look at how specifically this can manifest in our behaviors. So avoidance is a big one. We might avoid situations, people, conversations that could further expose the source of shame. This can also include substance abuse or other addictive behaviors that seek to numb the feelings of shame. Withdrawing or isolating, so we'll pull away emotionally or physically. We'll distance ourselves from relationships or social settings. Hiding, covering up, or lying. So trying to conceal the perceived flaw or failure that's causing the shame, whether it's through silence, denial, distraction, or even lying. So this client that I told you about, he developed a pattern of lying starting in early childhood. And he did it to just avoid disappointing others or getting in trouble. And it was a way for him to kind of cover up his shame by being dishonest and lying. So you can see how that might play out. Okay, some other ways that shame might be showing up for us is overcompensation. So overcompensation is an attempt to mask or counteract the feelings of unworthiness. So when someone feels ashamed, they might go to extremes to prove their value, competence, or likability. So sometimes sometimes they might react by asserting control or dominance or shifting the blame onto others. These are defense responses driven by the need to get external validation and prevent others from seeing the perceived weaknesses or failures that trigger their shame. So you can see some of these examples are perfectionism, people-pleasing, overachievement, materialism, status-seeking, aggressive dominance, and blame. And I mean, just looking over that list, I mean, these behaviors really harm relationships, and they harm the relationship that we have with ourselves too. They can lead to burnout, disconnection, and just overall deeper feelings of inadequacy, because what's going on is the underlying shame remains unaddressed. So, okay, we're shifting gears now. So Brené Brown teaches that the path to shame resilience involves these 4 key elements. So recognizing shame, practicing critical awareness, reaching out, and speaking shame. So recognizing, we're going to go through each one of these individually. So she found in her research, the people who knew how to do these 4 things were able to move through shame without sacrificing their values and come out on the other side with more courage, more compassion, and more connection than they had going into it. All right, so the very first step is we've got to identify our triggers. We've got to recognize when we're in shame. And so learning about our personal shame triggers is crucial, because then it empowers us to respond appropriately, okay? So shame triggers are situations, experiences, or even characteristics that provoke feelings of shame in us. When we're not aware of our shame triggers, we're more likely to react in ways that harm ourselves and others. On the other hand, when we understand what triggers our shame, we can build resilience and prevent it from dictating our thoughts and actions. And shame triggers have to do with desired and unwanted identities. Okay, so unwanted identities are characteristics, roles, or labels that we fear being associated with because they're socially devalued or stigmatized. When we feel that we're perceived or might be perceived in alignment with an unwanted identity, it brings up shame. Desired identities are kind of the opposite of that. It's these identities are the versions of ourselves that we aspire to be or believe that we should be based on societal, cultural, or personal expectations. So these are often the idealized versions of ourselves that we feel we need to look up to or live up to be worthy or accepted. So when we don't feel like we're meeting that expectation, it leads to shame. So as you begin to explore your personal shame triggers, you can start by asking yourself, how do I not want to be perceived? Or sorry, how do I want to be perceived? And how do I not want to be perceived? And that will start to reveal some things to you. And here's the thing, it's really important to know that everyone, even those who appear to have it all together, have it all figured out, have vulnerabilities related to these desired and unwanted identities. This doesn't make a person weak or bad. In fact, Brené Brown teaches that strength comes through knowing where we're vulnerable. Okay, and so to help us explore these personal vulnerabilities a little deeper, Brené Brown broke it down into 12 specific categories. So each of these categories, it reflects a common area where people can experience shame. So recognizing these categories helps us identify where it's showing up in our lives so that we can begin working toward resilience. So let's go through these. Appearance and body image is a huge one, right? Think about times you felt insecure about your weight, your height, your appearance in general. Our culture really teaches, it really hammers down that we must look a certain way to be valued. And when we feel like we don't, shame will show up. Family and parenting. So this category involves shame related to family roles or relationships. People can feel shame if they feel like they're not measuring up in terms of what a good parent is or what a good family looks like. So people who experience divorce or maybe even have kids that are struggling in some way may feel a deep sense of shame related to this, to their role. Mental and physical health. Imagine the shame that of someone with depression when a person says, you know, just snap out of it, right? The same goes for physical health challenges where people may feel ashamed for not being able to control their symptoms or their bodies. Addiction and substance abuse, this carries a heavy burden of shame. Whether it's substance abuse, gambling, or any other form of compulsive behavior, society tends to view addiction as a moral failing, which can intensify the feeling of being unworthy or irreparable. And this is an interesting fact. Research suggests that one of the greatest indicators of relapse behavior is shame. Work and career, just this, I mean, perceived failures or setbacks, underachievement in one's career can fuel shame, especially when people really tie their self-worth to their job performance and professional status. Money and financial stability, financial shame can be incredibly isolating. When someone's struggling with debt or feeling like they're not financially secure, they might avoid talking about it out of fear of judgment. And that fuels shame when we feel like we can't talk about things. Sex and intimacy. So this category is tied to personal relationships, sexuality, and intimacy. So whether it's about sexual orientation, past relationships, or sexual performance, shame in the realm of intimacy can be deeply personal and difficult to share, making it even harder to heal from. Religion and spirituality. So for those involved in religious communities, there can be intense shame around not living up to the tenets of the faith. Surviving trauma, again, you know, as I talked about earlier, when people experience trauma, they internalize that, the belief that something they've done created something that they've done brought the trauma on, right? Something, I must be defective somehow, or else why would this have happened to me? They might think I'm broken. I deserve what happened to me, even though trauma is never the victim's fault. Aging, this is a big one. It brings some unique shame triggers, especially in a society that places immense value on youth and physical appearance. Many people, as they age, feel shame, believing that they're becoming less valuable or less capable. And then finally, being stereotyped, whether it's due to race, gender, excuse me, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, or ability, this can lead to deep feelings of shame. All right, so as you can see, shame touches nearly every aspect of our lives. But by understanding these categories, we can begin to identify where shame may be hiding in our lives. Once we identify it, then we can start the work of developing shame resilience so it no longer holds us back from living authentically. Okay, so it's important, we're still on recognizing shame, right? It's important to be able to recognize when you're in the grip of shame, and we can do that by paying attention to our body and mind. So notice your body's physical reactions, right? People who described the experience of shame in their body will say, you know, my heart beats really fast, I'll sweat, I'll notice my vision narrowing, I'll feel tightness in my chest. I personally feel it in my throat gets really tight and my eyes get hot. So I know when that's happening, shame has shown up. You can observe your emotional responses. So do you feel small? Do you want to hide? Do you want to lash out? Do you want to shut down? And then really catch yourself, just notice the thoughts that are coming up for you. If you're feeling like, oh gosh, I'm a failure, I'm not good enough, I'll never change, that's shame showing up. Okay, the next thing we need to do after we recognize shame is we need to practice critical awareness. And this refers to the practice of questioning and challenging the societal, cultural, and personal beliefs that perpetuate feelings of shame. This is so critical in the role of shame. It's called critical because it's critical to become resilient to shame, because it helps us recognize that shame is often rooted in these external pressures and unrealistic expectations rather than personal failure. So some of these forces include social norms, media portrayals, cultural expectation, family of origin is huge, right? Each of these outside influences send strong messages about who or how we should be. So we get to start paying attention to recognizing the outside influences. So once we have done that, we shift into challenging the external influences. I love this picture because she's like, not really sure about these messages, right? So critical awareness, it requires us to question whether these external standards are fair or realistic. By critically examining the source of shame, people can begin to see that the expectations they're trying to meet are often first unattainable and most of the time irrelevant to their personal values. So to do this, some of the questions one might ask are, why do these expectations exist? Who benefits from these expectations? Brené Brown emphasizes how important it is to identify how industries, whether beauty, fitness, career, fuel these unrealistic expectations for profit, right? If I can feel really crappy about myself, I'm going to keep buying your product. Are these standards fair, realistic? Okay, this is such a good one. Is this who I want to be, or is this what others want me to be? These last two are pretty powerful too. Can I control how others perceive me? And what is the cost to me personally of trying to control how others perceive me? All right. Okay, so then we need to shift gears into reframing the narrative. So once we recognize the external origins of shame, we can begin to separate our self-worth from these societal standards and rewrite our personal narrative. This involves rejecting the notion that we need to conform to specific standards to be enough. Brown encourages individuals to redefine success and worth based on personal values, such as compassion, kindness, personal growth, rather than external validation. And we can practice, learn to self-validate. And when we do that, when we can validate ourselves, we rely less on others for our sense of self, for our worthiness. Critical awareness, practicing critical awareness is essential in shame resilience because it helps us question the legitimacy of these external messages. And it frees us from these unrealistic expectations. And here's the thing, practicing critical awareness, I think this for me has been, it's taken time to develop and I still struggle with it. And it really requires us to be intentional about practicing it. So be real patient with yourself and just keep trying. All right. Reaching out. Okay, vulnerability. This is the third element of shame resilience. So reaching out is critical. According to Brené Brown, the vulnerability is the key because it allows individuals to face and process their feelings of shame openly rather than hide them in secrecy or avoidance. Shame feeds on silence and isolation, and vulnerability breaks this cycle. Okay, so what is vulnerability? Vulnerability is the willingness to embrace uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. It involves allowing ourselves to be open to experiences, to people and situations without knowing the outcome. So this can include facing feelings of discomfort, fear, or shame. For Brown, vulnerability is nowhere near a weakness. Rather, it's a crucial part of living what she calls a wholehearted life. And it's the foundation for meaningful connections. And none of these things are easy. And especially if you've had negative experiences with opening up in this way. So it really requires courage on our part to be vulnerable. All right, so here is why vulnerability is central to reaching out. The first thing it helps us with is it breaks silence and secrecy. Shame, it just thrives when people remain silent about their experiences. It isolates them and makes them believe that they're alone in their feelings of inadequacy. So vulnerability requires the courage to openly express these feelings, which reduces shame's power. Creating connection and empathy. Vulnerability opens the door to genuine connection with others. In Brown's research, she indicated that empathy is the antidote to shame. So when someone responds to our vulnerability with understanding and compassion, it lessens the power of shame. I love this. She said, if you put shame in a petri dish, one of those little, it needs 3 things to grow exponentially: secrecy, silence, and judgment. She said, if you put the same amount of shame in the petri dish and douse it with empathy, it can't survive. So if you guys can think about a time where you're feeling really vulnerable or really ashamed of something that you'd experienced or done, and you actually opened up to someone who could hold space for that. And they said, I get it. Like, I'm here for you. I'm sorry that happened. It just, the shame dissipates, right? So empathy really plays a huge role in creating that connection. And all right, embracing imperfection. Okay, at its core, shame tells us that we have to be perfect to be worthy, right? And none of us are perfect, so we're never going to be worthy. So shame resilience involves rejecting that idea that we need to hide our flaws instead of embracing imperfection as part of being human. Because guess what? We're all human. We're all imperfect. And that's really what unites us as the human family. And then building courage to face shame. So people who are resilient to shame, they don't avoid it. They move into it. And by doing that, or they open up to it, they get curious about it. And by doing that, it really takes the power away from it. It helps them regain control over their feelings, and it reduces the likelihood that shame is going to dictate their behaviors or their self-worth. Okay, and then the final element of shame resilience is to speak shame. So this means to openly acknowledge and express feelings of shame instead of hiding them or keeping them secret. Okay, so we need to name the shame. So recognize when we're feeling ashamed and articulate what's causing the feeling. So an example of this would be, I'd say this to myself. I feel ashamed because I didn't perform well at work, and I'm worried people are going to think I'm not competent. Okay. And then speaking shame also involves sharing these feelings with someone that we trust. This could be a friend, it could be a family member, a therapist, a support group. At times, it would be important to set appropriate boundaries if necessary and ask for what we need. So an example of this would be like, I don't need solutions right now. I just need you to listen and remind me that I'm okay. And so by speaking about our shame rather than keeping it hidden, we reduce its power. And the act of speaking shame really transforms it from something that controls us to something that we can address and work through. It allows us to process our emotions, it'll heal, and eventually build resilience against future shame triggers. Okay, so Brené Brown teaches that shame happens between people and it heals between people. She's highlighting the social nature of shame and the essential role of human connection in overcoming it. So talking about it is how we heal and move forward from shame. Having healthy boundaries is so important when reaching out and speaking shame. Not everyone has earned the right to hear your story, especially the most painful or intimate parts of it. People need to prove that they are trustworthy, empathetic, and able to hold space for your experiences. So different people are going to fulfill different needs, okay? For example, a person might feel comfortable sharing about shame related to work or career with their mom, but not feel comfortable discussing issues of parenting with her, right? So they'll go to their friend for that. So it's important to kind of find those people and find the sweet spots, right? The places that they can really show up for you. All right. Okay, Brené Brown highlights that self-compassion is a crucial element of shame resilience. According to Dr. Brown, self-compassion involves treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding that you would offer to others, particularly in moments of personal failure or suffering. She draws heavily on the work of Dr. Kristen Neff. She is a pioneer in self-compassion research and integrates it into her shame resilience model. So self-kindness involves treating yourself with care, understanding, and gentleness rather than harsh criticism. When you make mistakes or face challenges or failures, self-kindness encourages you rather than judges you or punishes you. Common humanity, it's just recognizing that our personal inadequacies are just part of the shared human experience. Instead of feeling isolated or believing I'm the only one struggling, common humanity helps us realize that we're not alone and everyone experiences difficulties, mistakes, and pain. And then mindfulness, this is such an important one. Mindfulness is just being aware of painful thoughts and emotions in a balanced, non-judgmental way without suppressing or exaggerating them. Mindfulness allows us to observe our suffering without being overwhelmed or consumed by it. And mindfulness is a practice. And this is the way to break the cycle of shame while not abandoning our values. All right. Let's plug the shame resilience model into a scenario that I think we can all relate to in one way or another. Okay. So I'm going to call this person Maya. So Maya is a project manager at a marketing firm, and she was tasked with leading a high-profile campaign. She worked so hard on it, but the campaign didn't meet the client's expectations. And during a team meeting, her boss criticized her in front of her colleagues, saying the project had fallen short and needed drastic improvements. Okay, so step one is recognizing shame and its triggers. So Maya immediately felt shame after the public criticism. Her internal dialogue was harsh. I'm not good enough. I failed, and everyone knows it. Her shame was triggered by the belief that her performance at work defines her worth, and her fear of judgment from her colleagues and boss. Her unwanted identity that she identified was being perceived as incompetent, and that was fueling her shame. So Maya took a moment to pause and recognize her shame response. She acknowledged the tightness in her chest and the voice in her head telling her that she was a failure. And these were all indicators that she was experiencing shame. So step two, practicing critical awareness. So Maya used critical awareness to challenge the story she was telling herself. She asked herself, is it true that this one campaign defines my entire value as a project manager? She reminded herself that one project doesn't define her capabilities, and failures are a part of growth. Okay, step three, reach out. So what happened? Instead of retreating into isolation, Maya reached out to a trusted colleague, Sam. After the meeting, she expressed her feelings of shame. She said, I feel terrible about the feedback, and I worry that I've let everyone down. And Sam responded with empathy. He reassured her that everyone has challenging projects and that one setback does not define her abilities. So his empathy helped reduce Maya's feelings of shame. Number four, step four was speaking shame. So Maya decided to speak her shame more directly by having a private conversation with her boss. She calmly explained how the public criticism made her feel and asked for feedback on how she could improve without feeling undermined in front of the team. Her boss apologized for the harshness and acknowledged that the public critique could have been handled better. So they worked on a plan to address the campaign in a constructive way. So by speaking her shame, Maya opened the door to a more supportive and productive dialogue, while also setting boundaries for future interactions in the boardroom. And then Maya practiced self-compassion. By being kind to herself, instead of dwelling on the perceived failure, she reminded herself that she's still capable and professional, and she just had a tough project. She tried to use positive self-talk, telling herself, I did my best, and now I know what to improve for next time. She acknowledged her feelings without judgment and treating herself with the kindness she'd offer to a friend in a similar situation. Okay, so you can see by following the steps of shame resilience, Maya was able to manage her shame, ask for feedback, set boundaries, and take constructive steps toward improving in the future. Instead of being paralyzed by shame, she learned from the experience and built stronger relationships along the way. She came away feeling more resilient, more confident for future challenges. Okay, here are the resources that I used for the content today. If you are interested in learning more about this for yourself, I encourage you to maybe start with the TED Talk. She does one on shame and vulnerability. Any of these books here are valuable resources to dive a little bit deeper. I cannot overstate how practicing shame resilience for me personally has improved my well-being overall. It's helped me in my life, it's helped me in my relationships. And I hope that this information has been beneficial to you in some way. That's all I have, and I really appreciate you guys for taking time out of your Wednesday to attend. And I wish you all the best and a happy Halloween tomorrow.